Welcome to the Super Life Podcast.
Are we recording?
Yeah.
Oh shit. Okay.
Yeah. No, we're rolling. And sometimes I like it. I would just start talking about real stuff.
Yeah.
But thank you for writing this book.
Thank you.
It's clearly dear to me as well.
Receiving it, yeah.
And it's interesting that you had a very personal entry into this and kind of wasn't expecting it either, right? Mine was my father in the 90s, and you're like going, what is multiple chemical sensitivity? And I was like, oh my God. And then when you crack open, to your point earlier, when you crack open the research that's there and just nowhere at the same time, you're going, what is going on?
Right.
So why don't you explain, because I think everyone can understand from a animal lover perspective. You can get into as many details as you want, but you're loving German Shepherd.
Golden Retriever.
I
like German Shepherds.
Yeah.
But I like Golden Retrievers.
That was a Freudian slip because my two German Shepherds.
It probably was Freudian because you're thinking about your love for your own dogs.
Yeah,
but I won't cry. I feel like this is from what's the McGuire movie where he says, "I'm not going to cry. I'm not going to cry."
Right,
yeah. So basically, I don't think I'd be here talking to you, doing the work I'm doing, in any stretch, if it wasn't for the fact that my heart was broken with this puppy, Golden Retriever, who got sick 15 years ago. And I was busy. I was a young mom with like really little kids and working and trying to get my stuff together. And my dog got sick. He was our firstborn. It was like the practice baby. And so at 4.5 years of age, he was sick. And I thought, he just swallowed a sock. Golden's siding off of the house if you let him, right? In fact, he was actually. And then we gave him this toy, and he was sucking on this red vinyl plastic toy for round the clock and all that. So he was diagnosed with autoimmune hepatitis, which is, for humans or pets, it's when your body's immune system attacks itself. In his case, the liver. Hepatitis is liver. And it's completely rare in dogs. And it's even more rare in Golden Retrievers that we found out, working with the vet. And so at 4.5, he had the liver the size of a golf ball. And it was really not fixable, but, he lasted another 5-6 months comfortably. And, but what was so interesting is that I was so heartbroken, I couldn't understand how this dog got sick. And his breeder said no one else was sick in this litter. I looked at his water, I looked at his dog food. I was wondering, at the time there was like melamine contamination, I think, of dog food at the time. I looked at drinking water because we live on a farm in New Jersey, and I thought, it's cracking a pipe, pesticides, whatever. And then that could be affecting us. So long story short, the more I dug into his exposures, including that red toy in his mouth, which really, I found a lot of literature on that too, in human studies. The more I looked into his exposures, the more I uncovered this sort of open Pandora's box of what is not regulated in human markets in the United States: cosmetics, personal care products, cleaning products. Chemicals aren't tested for safety before they go into personal care products and what we use on our kids, our bodies. But what's so interesting, besides the lack of regulation, I was looking at all the science on the chemicals that were being studied by third-party academic centers, not manufacturers, because they're not required to do it, nor do they want to reveal what they're finding, I'm sure. And these third-party groups, including this big group of endocrine disrupting chemical researchers, I later found out are a very tight group, including one that became my co-author for 2 books, that the science was there. The science is there for how many of them, affect the human body through the endocrine system, through metabolism, and now what I write about is through the immune system from a rheumatologist perspective. So long and short, it was a total disconnect between what I learned as a physician and as an immune disease doctor, and now I'm finding out all this information that I wasn't aware of, and I went from shock to like anger pretty quickly.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's I mean, disconnect is it's a chasm, in the sense that, all of these chemicals, most of them unregulated, untested, not only just linearly, they're not, and no one understands the interaction of all of them all the time, every day, slathering on one after another, and that's where this just explosion of, and it's tricky too, right? Because it's many exposures over time that then all of a sudden, well, where's the smoking gun? And from the reductionist standpoint of certainly modern medicine, you're trying to figure out, well, what's causing it? What is your, like, how do you grapple with that as a doctor too? It's like, so maybe unpack that anger a little bit, because being a badass doctor that you are, and then,
tell that to my kids.
Yeah, and then having this loved one, which could easily, listen, the proximity of a dog and a baby is the same, right? In terms of what they're interacting with, the things they're putting in their mouth.
Hand, paw, interaction, like all of that. Yeah.
Yeah, so that anger, what was the anger? Like, where the genesis of all this training, all of this stuff that you've dedicated your life to, and yet zero, nothing was being taught to you as a frontline kind of person and trying to help people?
Yeah. So I went through sort of like the Kubler-Ross stages of mourning, anger, denial, whatever. I mean, acceptance, over the course. I wouldn't say it was quick.
Yeah.
At first, my disbelief made me study. I wanted to understand, is this true? I'm not a conspiracy theorist pretty much on any level.
Right.
And I do my research because I don't want to be wrong. I'm worried of always being wrong, It's just kind of part of my type A personality. So I was like, I started first watching environmental working group stuff.
Yeah.
And I thought that was so interesting. And then I started looking at the medical papers, because everyone has access to PubMed.gov, right? So I even teach my patients how to look up their own studies about their own stuff, because we should be educated consumers as far as I'm concerned. So I started looking at some of these medical journals, and then I would, take the first or second author and try to contact them and say, is this real? Is this true? And then I started wanting to educate my community, because in New Jersey, we don't hear a lot about this, but I always like to lecture and, so I reached out to EWG and I said, can someone help look at these slides? I have like 40 slides. I'm not sure if they're right. Literally, that happened. And the senior scientist at the time, Joanna Congleton, who I also credit a lot to my work, said, first of all, you're the first doctor that's ever reached out to us. And second of all, let me tell you and send you some articles on what we know about many of these chemicals.
How are you the first doctor to reach out to them?
She said that because this was 15 years ago. Wow. And I can argue that most people today don't have a good handle on this, most doctors.
Right.
Because it's a deep dive. And, I'm teaching now 3 physician programs after they've graduated. Many of them are in practice now, coming back for this information. So that's become my return of what I've learned is, how do I give back? I try to get into programs I can teach, especially doctors, because they have such a wide, reach for what they can do. But long story short, Joanna Congleton was pretty remarkable, and she said, I'm going to send you some articles, and I'm going to do it little by little, and then maybe we can do a program together where you can get it into hospitals or what have you. So a year and a half of just reading. It was like a year of putting together this information, understanding how many of these chemicals are not following typical toxicology. They're not the dose response curve, whereas the more you're exposed to, the greater the physiology changes, the physiologic changes. Whereas actually the very smallest doses, parts per million, parts per billion, parts per trillion, can actually have the same effect as some of the higher doses that have been studied.
Right. So that's
the key issue.
Yeah,
that's the key issue. Is the toxicology paradigm was thrown on its head because we now know many of these chemicals can do what hormones can do, and have been doing for millions of years of evolution. They're conserved. You save energy with hormones. They do incredibly phenomenal physiologic changes to the human body. but you only need a teeny tiny amount.
Right.
And that's what these chemicals were found to do. And in terms of the people doing this research, boy, did they get hounded. Boy, do they still get hounded. Boy, do I get hounded, because the world of chemistry and chemicals and toxicology does not like this argument,
Right.
because it really goes against a lot of the products and the chemicals in those products that we love. So EWG basically started to educate me. And during this time, I was listening to everything I can get my hands on in terms of chemicals in food and water, and learning about the water system, which has become one of my favorite topics. And little by little, I started getting into grand rounds departments for hospitals. And in fact, I had to leave EWG off the request because they thought it was commercial. So I understood how to work the educational system and try to, go in as straight academic as I could. And I went to, maybe 25, must have been 25 grand rounds departments: pediatrics, neonatology, internal medicine, family medicine, geriatrics. I lectured at all of them. But the interest was really lackluster from physicians, especially even the heads of NICUs that have access to changing out the plastic respiratory equipment, IV lines, many of the medical equipment contaminants.
Right.
And they didn't want to change, even though my last slide would show this is how you reach out to find out whether, major companies have alternatives, and they do, and you just have to reach out. No one really wanted to figure that out.
So let's talk about that so people really understand. The dose is the poison, and it's kind of flipped on its head, right? So you have this very delicate system, pineal, pituitary, the hormonal communication system, very delicate, but then all of a sudden we have this infusion of IDCs and EDCs and all this other parabens, phthalates, plastics, petroleum, all of these things, PFAS, all of this stuff. And the argument is it's a small amount and it's a part per million per whatever, and that's their pushback, right? The industry pushback.
It ain't gonna hurt you because it's too little to do anything.
It's too little, and people can understand that because, hey, I'm not gonna eat. It's like the.
I'm not going to eat a tire. I'm not going to drink a cup full of,
Exactly.
BPA, or,
Exactly.
My food packaging only maybe has a little on my food when I eat it. Whatever.
I don't see it.
Right.
It can't
Doesn't
be that
exist.
big a deal.
Exactly.
How could they possibly
Right.
put something that harmful?
Right. It should be regulated, or else the U.S. government wouldn't serve it to me in the stores and in my restaurants. We always think there's a protection mechanism regulatory wise. That doesn't exist. So that was shocking.
That I tell you what,
There's multiple layers of shock here.
That's what was, I knew it on some level, but when you spend the time and you dig in, going, wow, the delusion is that they have a regulatory title, right? The delusion, the FDA, the USDA, the FCC, the FTC, you name it. Just go down the line, and when you start to look at this stuff, you go, okay, now they're setting up an organization of maybe a PFAS organization to then do something. I'm like, what do you mean? Why would you have to set up another organization to do the very thing that you were supposed to be doing in the beginning? I had so many swear words coming out of my mouth when you would realize that, oh, wow, there's not regulation. And in fact, that plausible deniability thing, because if they studied it themselves, now they're liable. And when they're supposed to be studied, while the FDA has no ability to regulate anything because they don't have the people or the resources, you're supposed to do it as a company, and then the company doesn't do it because then it's so
crazy,
gnarly.
Yeah. And it's been going on a long time. Like, if you think, 1938 was the first passing of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act, and it was really light, okay? And I don't know if you know the story of lash lore. I wrote about it in my last book. So basically, there was a petroleum-based dye. It was like an aniline dye that was used to make mascara in 1930s, 1933. Very popular product, and women were using it for mascara, and many women became blind from it. And the daughter of one of the women who died, this Musser, I can't remember her first name, Miss Musser, but the daughter wrote to Franklin Delano Roosevelt and said, my mother's blind, this is a horrible tragedy. And so that was then the 1938 Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act was born. The problem is it didn't really have much to it. It had like a page and a half in the entire, 300-page document. So there really wasn't any protections. And then, basically nothing has changed since 1976 with TSCA, the Toxic Substance Control Act. Right. That's particularly related to products. When we talk about food and generally regarded or recognized as safe chemicals, that's a whole nother debacle that in 1958 was supposed to be a food additives amendment. Right. That was to protect us from, at the time they had vinegar and salt, so no one could see ahead to the, 11,000 food chemicals that are now allowed in the food system, in our food. So, we really just not only have not had a great starting point for protection against, manufacturing, we've allowed it to run wild. And, this country is built on, manufacturing growth and development. And unfortunately, we just never saw what the consequences could be in terms of not just health, but even degradation of these products and chemicals into our environment, which, by the way, happen to circle back into our bodies through our water system, which I find really unique and interesting. And I'll be sharing with my kids in their upper school next week and on Earth Day, but.
And that was an obvious, but still a blaringly kind of a big bell that went off going, if these packaged things or these products or these cosmetics are harming me, then inherently just the mere creation of them and the bad manufacturing practices of them is directly polluting the air, the water, the food, all of that stuff. So as within, so without. It's the same.
Oh, we're all connected.
Right?
The air we breathe, the air we try to have green trees and foliage make for us. Yeah. It's all cyclical. Rachel Carson talked about this in the 1960s. Some people have read her book Silent Spring, but boy, did she talk about DDT that was being sprayed, how it was affecting, birds essentially and other wildlife. And she made a call out to that. And we're still kind of heeding her warning and managing her shout out, 60 years later. And we haven't come that much farther, which is why I always cycle back to the question of who are we waiting for? Right. If you're waiting to be saved by government changes, look, we have red dye number 3 is going to be taken away, and woo,
one out of 60,000.
And how about 4 perfluoroalkyls were going to be, on a desk ready to be signed to be managed under the Safe Drinking Water Act, which, manages 160,000 wastewater treatment plants in the United States that serve 86% of U.S. citizens in their drinking water, right? The rest is well water. 15% is like wells. And the Safe Drinking Water Act, which was designed to manage only 91 chemicals since 1976, has not changed in 50 years. Right. And to have these perfluoroalkyls, which are the forever chemicals that are stain guard and Scotch guard and, waterproofing chemicals and wrappers, they picked 6 of them out of the 15,000 that exist within this class. Yeah. And it became last, fall, it was something of an exciting period where they were going to add these to the Safe Drinking Water Act list of 91 chemicals. So we'd have, 6 or 7 or whatever, if depending. The problem is that there's just so many that, to pick and choose 1 or 2 here and there is not going to make a dent. So all the work that I've always done and the anger that I felt, I'm going to hit your mic in a second. I need a drink, organic drink. All of this anger was I'm a very much of a what do you do about it? What are the solutions, you know? Because if you wait for things to change, and I encourage, by the way, writing your senators, writing your congresspeople, buying products that are safer, cleaner to move the market. I mean, don't get me wrong, you can do both.
Yeah.
But I've always been of the school, well, what are you going to do to protect your own body?
Right.
You know,
Right now.
and who cares who's in power? Who cares who's head of HSS? So I've just been always nose to the grindstone. What are the most reasonable ways to reduce exposures with the least amount of cost in the most reasonable, practical way over a reasonable period of time? Because it is a journey for everyone. I mean, I still color my hair, and my kids play lacrosse on really pretty toxic turf, like 4 or 5 times a week. They're lacrosse players. But we have to live our lives. And so there's a balance between how nuts you get and how reasonable and easy swaps can be. And that's kind of what I put into this new book, amongst the other ones. Yeah.
No, I love that. And that can help curb the overwhelm, right? When people are hearing this stuff, and you and I are kind of, pun intended, swimming in this all the time. And the actionable things is the number one question, right? And so like, well, okay, so, oh my God, what do we do? And I love the way you've oriented that, because hey, the things that you can control, let's do those and not have this toxic burden kind of get out of control. Whereas, hey, your kids are in school, whatever's there, whatever water they're exposed to, whatever playground they're exposed to, there's not a lot you can do at this particular time. But if they're at home and you're filtering their water and you get clean food and you're not using nanoparticulate PFAS, which is crazy how the Teflon pan is gone in some respect, but it's not. And it's just a sleight of hand and all of this stuff. By the way, before I forget, there's a new documentary called How to Poison a Planet with all of the people. It's not out yet, but I went to the premiere, talked to Mark Ruffalo. He was in it because it was all of those attorneys.
Bob Billett.
Yep.
I interviewed him, and I work with his law firm a little bit.
Yeah, he's badass.
Yeah,
right?
Badass, and his people he works with, they're badass as well. I mean, they're pretty much fighting the fight. But
yeah. So this stuff is getting out there, and and even going back to DDT, like we've done this experiment with zero understanding acutely of what's going on, and DDT is still showing up in people's blood today, and PFAS is in pretty much everyone's blood. When I say pretty much, 99% of so again, don't go numb and do nothing, because you'll end up, unfortunately, like my father, or you're golden, and you'll get overwhelmed, and then next thing you know, what do we do about this kind of cascade that's now enveloped? And if you're unconscious and you continue to drink whatever you're drinking or slathering on whatever unfortunately, it's just a matter of time.
Yeah, and the time we don't have. And so, as a rheumatologist, and this is why the book became so particularly relevant after 22 years, and I'm still practicing rheumatology, but after 22 years of practicing, you see enough of a pattern that mimics what the studies are showing epidemiologically around the world. And, we have this epidemic of immune and autoimmune conditions. Immune being your body, fighting against the world, infection, dermatitis, chemicals, whatever, fighting what comes onto the body. And then autoimmune, which is where the immune system is basically triggered to attack itself. Doesn't necessarily know when to turn off. And that has a lot to do with habits and lifestyle and stuff I work through with them. But the idea that we have this epidemic, so 7 to 14% of the U.S. population now has one or more of one of the 80 autoimmune diseases that are classically written about in medical literature. There's lots of in-between symptoms and people who don't fit criteria. That's another area of medicine.
You're talking millions and millions.
Yeah,
and millions
it could be a lot more. And so it's basically out of a population of 330 million in the U.S., it's about 24 to 30 million people that are now managing an autoimmune issue. And it's expected to continue to rise. 1% of the U.S. population and around the world has rheumatoid arthritis. And we know that many of the exposures that we're seeing, the chemicals actually have the ability to trigger the immune system in ways that are consistent with autoimmune diseases processes. So, it's one of those things where not only do I want to speak to people to not, create risk for themselves by prevention, and that's certainly the work I like to do with high school and college and, physicians who are in training, but we also want to manage people who currently manage diseases. People who flare with rheumatoid arthritis or lupus or Crohn's or MS have the ability to reduce those flares through their lifestyle changes, through their body burden of chemicals. And you don't have to be perfect. It's not about being perfect. I'm a realist, not a perfectionist or a purist. I really do understand that life is busy and we are strapped for cash and strapped for time and strapped for interest and overloaded by a lot of negativity. The idea is that a lot of this doesn't even take a lot of work or money or even thought once you get through it. It's very, very simple, low-hanging fruit kind of stuff, and yet the payoffs can be great. Because not only do your body can be measured, and I don't even encourage a lot of testing, that's a whole nother area, but take my word for it, when you make changes through food choices, using available frozen USDA organic produce as opposed to fresh, which may not have nutrient value, for instance. Frozen organics are available across the country in every big box store now. It's lucrative.
And you could argue that they're could be better because they haven't been shipped fresh and they haven't been, and they have to wait till they're ripe or else they're no good and you're not gonna, so they're ripe and then frozen,
flash frozen, right, and thrown into bags, which we have to think about taking them out of plastic bags and not using steamer bags. But to this point where I created a paradigm for how to go about navigating this topic, and you probably saw it, it's the 4 A's. And this is what I'm teaching doctors now and high school students, literally the same knowledge base, if you want to ask me, but really interesting groups, is the 4 A's consists of A, assess. And in the book, we have a 50, I say we, like me and my cat. We have a 50, my new dog, like I say we, the corporation of me and Aly. The idea that we have a 50 question, very reasonable questionnaire with point systems where you can kind of see where you're starting from. So assess is really understand why and where, or I should say where these chemicals are coming from in a very reasonable way. You have to know in order to fix it. The second A is avoid or swap. I say avoid because it's an A. But the idea is that you can avoid by reducing overexposure to things you don't even need that we've been marketed to. Like, why do you need an oven cleaner? Why do you need a sink cleaner? Why do you need a window cleaner? Why do you need a doorknob cleaner? Why do you need a carpet cleaner? If you think about it, you could have one product that covers all of this.
For sure. Make it yourself.
Yeah, make it yourself. And we actually have do-it-yourself recipes in there. But you could also look them up if you're busy like me and doesn't want to, I used to make them when I was back into this, way back 15 years ago. But the avoid is great, but also the swaps are that they're really great products out there done by really good companies doing good things. So swapping is not such a big effort anymore because the market is really, available for that. The third A is add, which when I think about nutrition and food quality, add is one of the key issues in nutrition, specific nutrients. Folic acid, B9, vitamin, omega-3 fatty acids, quercetin, vitamin C, all the antioxidants, fiber. These are key nutrients that actually offset some of the harm, even the epigenetic, the epigenetic harm from exposures, things that affect whether or not genes get expressed or not, because that's based on proteins that either allow genes to be expressed to disease or not. And we have control over our epigenome, which is amazing. So adding is sweating. Adding is great quality sleep to help with the lymphatic system and washing some of these chemicals out. Adding is mental health and, managing stress that affects the pH of the gut, which is so critical to the immune system. And so this add piece, I always say you can take away all the triggers, you can take away all the chemical exposures that piss off your immune system in the world. But if you don't add the nutritional components or the sweating components or all the things that help detoxify us, you're missing a really big chunk of the problem, of the solution, I should say.
Right. There's on the one hand, if you're not doing anything, you're getting exposed. So through your questionnaire, you're going, hey, I'm going to give you an assessment based on all of this research. It's not really a question. It's that based on this research, you are getting exposed from these types of behaviors, right? So let's understand that.
Yeah.
Right? And then if you start to avoid that and you're not doing the nutrition, then you don't have the fortification of your body to even do normal processes, because our food quality is such a
food quality is a problem in the U.S. And, listen, I always say it's modern human problem. This is a dilemma of modern humans, right? Sure. We're the same humans we were millions of years ago. Yeah. We've required the same nutritional inputs and ingredients to make our cells thrive, our cells, not selves, but cells thrive. Say that 6 times fast. And, the thing is that, and I love anthropology. I think it's the basis for everything I think about and do, because we didn't just plop here with nice shoes and great cologne, right? We've been around a while, and our cells and our tissues and our bodies require, it asks for clean water, clean air, clean food, clean products, all that stuff. So the messaging is really take it back a notch. Let's look about, where we came from. Look at what we're using, what's in, on, and around our bodies. Let's just think about our bodies as a sponge in modern day times. And when you talk about the food system, boy, if I had time to grow food, I would. Mm-hmm. For people who want to and they can't find space to do it, that's a whole nother issue, right? Mm-hmm. But our food system has really limited dramatically, and we know this from the numbers, from how much vitamin D people are taking in and what their blood levels are. We know magnesium's a problem. I'd love to talk about iodine. It's like my favorite micronutrient that people don't realize protects their thyroid. Right. We don't get any of that anymore. Right.
And there's a lot of issues.
Yeah, there's a lot of nutrient issues, and I even have a whole, chapter on the 4 nutrients that I think every human, I call it a human fertilizer, that every human should be on from birth till death. And it's very dramatic, but it's very realistic in terms of what we're seeing from a human health perspective.
It's funny, as I was driving here, and because of the traffic, it was routing me all these different places, and I was just in the middle of Encino, which is an area I've never really driven through, and I took this right and going around traffic, and took this left, and I looked, and there was a huge community garden in the middle of nowhere.
Isn't that cool?
And I was like, it was huge. It was like a victory garden on steroids for this whole community. I was like, oh my God. So instead of plopping up, an apartment complex, I bet you, just by the looks of it, that community
fought for it,
rallied, and there was a guy walking the lines, and you could tell it was almost like one of those thrift stores in a sense, because each one had its own unique, and it doesn't take much,
right?
But it takes an awareness,
right,
and a consciousness, and a bit of a fight of action, to go, hey, I might not have land right now, but what is possible when we gather together and come together, and what, to your point earlier, people ask me all the time, this administration, that administration, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, listen, I don't have the space to get lost in that. I know where I'm going. Right. I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm committed to, and it's not changing. These cartoon characters can change. Yeah. Right? But this still, what we're talking about is still here. It's matured for a very long time. And to your point, in our home, there is so much that we can do to change these exposures. Yeah. But the blindness of, because I think every person on some level has to go through what we went through, and maybe on a bigger level of just the shock of, there's people today that they can't get their head around the fact that they would allow chemicals in our food that are harmful. There's people that won't allow themselves that moment of the Matrix moment, even a slight look at, hey, we're not making this up.
Right.
This is huge history, and a lot of
people don't do anything until it affects their heart. or kishkas, as we say, and I guess it's a Yiddish word, but it has to hit you right here.
Right.
It hit it for you, it hit it for me, and like I said, I wouldn't be here if my dog had lived a perfectly healthy golden life, maybe about 11 if we could have gotten him there, or 12. It just wouldn't have happened. I would have lived a very similar life to everyone else, and that's, when you don't know, you don't know. And most of these chemicals don't smack you in the face, right? They don't give you a rash. They don't make you sick on an individual basis. Like, it's just one of those things where, it almost has to really affect you. And I don't want it to affect people in a horrible way. I'm seeing younger people. I mean, part of the reason this book was so important to me was I'm seeing younger and younger people getting sick with autoimmune and immune disorders than you would ever expect, number one. And what's so remarkably interesting is they have no family history of these diseases. So these are de novo cases of immune and autoimmune diseases that are happening earlier and younger, even cancers. I mean, we hear that all the time. Well, cancer is an immune system disorder. And endocrine system, immune system, they are, cross-talking, they're communicating. We don't have siloed systems in the human body.
Right.
The body is all about networking and communication and signaling. And when you have chemicals that are able to do this at very, very low levels, and your behaviors are such that you're always exposed to them, right? Then you can start to see how things can go awry. The one thing I point out more than anything throughout the book is that, look, and it's a very positive book. I mean, we're talking about a daunting conversation, but that's really only the beginning of the book, right? The idea is you have to have a little bit of the why in order to do the what, right? But the whole book is about the what. What do we do? And how do we suss out the food labels? And how do we suss out, how do we look at a couch and know it has no flame retardants? And, it's as simple as looking at the label, right?
Yeah.
But if you don't know, you don't know. And the fact is that when people, and I have studies throughout the book is highly referenced, right? So you can get the articles that we're talking about to make this the case, that when you change behaviors, and one of the most reasonable one to think about is like, when you stop eating certain foods or certain food packaging. Like BPA has wonderful study, which is so illustrative of the issue, is that when you change your behavior like canned foods and try to move towards fresh or frozen foods, you can actually really reduce BPA. There was a great study that had 75 participants from, it was Harvard School of Public Health, 75 participants were in the study, volunteered, and they were given 1 can of soup for lunch as their only change. And it was Progresso, by the way, it was in the study. And so that was the only thing that changed in their diet for their day in terms of ingestion. And for 2 weeks, they ate canned soup from Progresso. Then they had a 3-day washout, which meant they didn't have any canned soup. And then the next 2 weeks, the same 75 participants had fresh soup with no packaging. And when they measured their urine levels of BPA, which is how it's measured, they had 1,100% drop in bisphenol A. Wow. Because BPA, number one, all chemicals have different properties, but it happens to be a short half-life, meaning it can wash out if you change your behavior. And so that's why people who change out from canned soup can often really lower their levels, which is an endocrine and immune disrupting chemical, one of many bisphenols, but really it's pervasive. So we have a real opportunity when you understand where the chemicals are coming from, what they're about, how they break down, to really reduce our exposures and then measure them if you choose. I actually don't push testing. Because even though there's some really great outside labs, I actually put ICD-10 codes in the book for what to hand to your doctor and say, listen, I pay insurance. I pay out the nose for my insurance. Will you check for your, whole blood mercury, cadmium, arsenic, and lead? Very common exposures, right? Just pick, that. And I do that with every patient who walks through the door. But you need an ICD-10 code, which is the label that says it's warranted through the healthcare system. And if a doctor is willing to do that and other testing, LabCorp, Quest, and all the conventional labs that take insurance are useful and really beneficial. So you save money so you can put money into other things like water filters or organic foods. So using your money wisely is a big part of this book so that people understand it's accessible to everybody.
Yeah, and I love that you said that because that's such a great study too, that think about that. If you're just always eating this packaged food or that canned food or all that stuff, you're not even giving your body a chance to stop and detox. Because the thing is, you have this life force of our evolution, that our bodies want to thrive. They want to stay happy and healthy and vibrant and all of that's the power, right? But if you keep getting exposed, you don't give it that chance, right? And so that's a great example of hey, maybe stop eating the canned this or canned that or plastic water bottle or whatever else, because like you said, a lot of these chemicals do have half-lives in the body, and the parabens and things like that. The tricky ones, obviously, are the forever chemicals and the...
But that can be done, too. I mean, I test myself all the time, and, I have patients that want to be tested, and there's no... And I even talk about it in the book. I have a patient that I actually tested who was a pizza parlor guy, and he owned a pizza place, and he was covered, he was filled with PFAS chemicals because... all of the things he's handling are recycled wrappers, and he had, BPA and some other chemicals. And the idea was that he came because he was exhausted and he was fatigued. And, you don't think fatigue is anything but, poor night's sleep, on your phone too much. But when we went through the entire history, really understood if his thyroid was, low, or, vitamin D levels can make you fatigued. And so I went through an enormous number of steps to figure out, what could be the problem. And when we got to his chemicals, he was loaded. And when we started to pull that away from his life in terms of, wearing nitrile gloves when he's handling his pizza boxes, and, biking to work instead of, driving because he doesn't get exercise, and, he's eating sandwiches every day and high carb loads, and, just busy. And I get it. But believe it or not, the guy did great. And this is an example of many patients who may not have an autoimmune disease, but maybe that is a part of it or not. But there's lots of things we can do to feel better and to change the destiny of our health, essentially, by what we do, pretty much, routinely, if we can manage it. It's not perfection. I forgot the fourth A out of my 4 A's, which were assess, avoid, add. The last was allow. And allow is allowing me to have colored hair. It's allowing me to have lacrosse fields that I have to be on and my kids have to be on all the time. It's going to birthday parties and having cake with, purple ice, icing, or traveling as you do around the world. You're not always going to have access to the things you would like to have, or, have at home where you can control your environment. And I think that's a really important message, because part of the psychological trauma of this kind of topic is that you think it's too overwhelming to actually make a dent. And if you allow yourself to have these moments of life that don't make you feel guilty and regret, then I think it makes you motivated to keep moving.
No, it's a great point. It's a huge point, because the things that you are controlling are building a more of a body resiliency, right? So you're less toxic exposure, you're doing your best, you're filtering your water, you're staying away from fragrances and other chemicals, and lowering amount of exposures. But then, there's nothing you really can do in certain situations.
Right.
So just, hey, man,
take a breather.
I'm okay. When I have to buy that damn water bottle in the airport.
Oh, I know, it's like
oh my.
But it's interesting. I've been filling up with my flask, and that was a change that I didn't think I was even going to make. But now it's funny. Even my hotel had one of those. It's a carbon block filtration system, but everything in life is a risk-benefit ratio, right? Is a carbon block filtration better than, say, a reverse osmosis 1 liter bottle of water? By the way, you can see that it's reverse osmosis under ingredients. People don't realize that you have choices, even amongst plastic bottles. It's not going to necessarily cut down microplastics, but you can see how the water is either cleaned by distillation, by ozonation, or by reverse osmosis. And that takes just an extra second of your time to choose differently. But even getting a manicure, pedicure, things that are little. I put in the book all of the things that I've learned over 15 years. If you're going to get a manicure, pedicure, and you enjoy that, great, have fun. Maybe limit how much you do. Maybe try to avoid it during pregnancy. But guess what? Even if you looked up your base coat, not that you get your nails done all the time, but even if you looked at your base coat, which is the closest to your body, right? It's the coating that's on your toenail itself. Make sure that clear base coat is a 1 on EWG's environmental working group level, or Yucca or Clearia or any of the wonderful apps that are out there. This is what I teach high school students. I literally come in with bags of stuff. And I toss tampons at the jocks, and I toss, the Axe body spray at the girls, and everyone giggles uncomfortably. But you know what? Then they dive into these apps, and they are empowered to make decisions for their own bodies. And you'd be amazed, like, a nail polish that's like, brown muck, or you'd think it was toxic waste, could be absolutely non-toxic compared to the clear nail polish that someone else got in the room. So it's an empowering moment, but I've always felt give people the fishing rod and not the fish, because companies change formulations, they get bought out. You don't always know whether a company is going to be consistently clean. And so just by having the tools to suss it out every year or two and figure out, I think it's really important as we move through this manufacturing system we have.
Yeah, and EWG's tried to make it pretty accessible. And then if you played with the Yucca app,
I haven't had a chance to play with it, but they use a lot of the same data. It's how they present it. Clearia does a great job too.
Exactly. So all these, because I talked to the Yucca people, and in Europe, I think it's 1 out of 3 people are using the app to find clean products, and then now adopting in the US. They have 90 million users.
Wow.
Right? So clearly people want it. It's not completely this is way too much. But accessible things. And kind of going back to you, I chuckled because the water thing. I went to New Zealand to film some stuff earlier in this year, and I was like, I'm going to be there a while. And I got to figure out, someone's got to make a portable RO system, because when I was filming,
I would love for someone to do that. That'd probably be the first commercial investment. I don't do any sales or endorsements of anything. I've never done it.
This one's a big one.
There's some really cool stuff that I would love to be able to be part of.
Yeah, because on Down to Earth, when we were filming that, I was we had so much equipment. I'm I brought an AquaTrue.
Did you?
Yeah, I just brought and then I bought the crew one. So I said, let's not use plastic anything. Let me show you how to use this filter when we're in location. And so they started using it. I put it in my hotel room. So
that's interesting.
Yeah, but it's big.
I always looked at camping gear as the first place to start, because they're the ones that have to get rid of giardia and they have to clear. So I thought if they had a filter.
I found one.
Interesting.
So that's what I found. I was looking because I wanted to reach out to some people going, hey, I want to get behind you and create a portable one. And I did find one. An RO system, manual pump. So now I'm in New Zealand. I'm in my hotel room. It's already a part of my morning routine now. I'm literally pumping.
Isn't that great?
There's a discharge. And then there's another tube, and I'm pumping and filling up. And I was like, and of course I have my glass bottle that I bring with me. And I'm like, the joy. And let's talk about that, because
you have to want that. Okay, so there's all level of crazy in this whole topic, right? And I mean that because I don't mean it in a negative way, really. I mean it in a tongue-in-cheek way, because I have people that come up to me like I'm a priest and they confess to me, and I'm laughing because I'm like, you don't even know my world of mistakes and problems with this topic, but you kind of live and learn, and it becomes almost like gamifying. If you want to turn it into a game, it can be gamifying, because you're winning if you make these changes that stick and you can live with them and you're psyched about it. That's the flip side of this process, that once you kind of get a little bit, smart about all these choices and changes, you just layer them in. You start to have fun with these changes.
And I think there is a, when you start to kind of create that cascade effect, when you get to integrate, it's like this, like going home and cleaning your house. It's a pain in the ass to clean your rooms and all, but when it's done, you feel so good. Right? So it's this kind of idea that, I'm gonna swap out this, I'm gonna add that, and you get to go, okay, here's a roadmap. I now know that let's stay away from BPA and BPH, and let's stay away from that, from the can thing. Let's go to frozen. That makes sense. Okay.
Big ticket items,
Right.
big
Exactly.
volume
Water
exposures.
filters, all that stuff.
I did it, speaking of the roadmap, I mean, I will say this to plug the book a little bit, because I worked really hard on it and I put a lot of thought into this at 22 years in of everything. I'm tired. I wanted people to understand that. So there's a 21-day plan.
Yeah.
The 21-day plan is not going to make anyone clear of any chemicals 100%. It wasn't designed to be perfection.
Right.
But it is a really, like, where do I start?
Right.
Day 1, do this. Day 2, do this. It's after you've learned why you need to do them. Right. But it's so motivating to have a 1 day, 2 day, and each week is an assess and avoid and add. It brings in that paradigm, even allow to kind of do this in a way that gets you really started on your way.
I love that.
And it's meant for everyday people. It's not meant for super, super knowledgeable people on this topic or people who have no idea of science. It has nothing to do with that. It's really basic. And of all the things, you never know how a book is going to resonate.
Right.
And it's not out, when it comes out, it's very soon, but maybe by the time this podcast airs. But the idea is that you don't know what's going to resonate. And the one thing that seems to have resonated is the 21-day plan, because no one's really put it into very tangible way of looking at this problem.
Well, that's the question.
Yeah.
Like, at the end of the day, people can't follow all of the science that you've dug into, but they now trust enough.
We hope.
And trust you enough to go, oh, this is very compelling. What do I do?
Right.
Because I don't have the time to dig into all of this stuff to prove to myself. It's like you've done that, and then a map of like, okay, where do I start?
Right.
And if you've already had your filter, and great, then you don't have that to worry about.
Yeah.
You can move on to the next one and the next. What are some of the shocking ones for you? I mean, water and personal care and home, and what were people ask me this shit all the time. What for you stood out as like, God damn it, I can't believe that this is still.
I was pretty upset about fragrances because, I think about like all of the nostalgic scents in my life. Like when I'm dating in high school in the Drakkar Noir. And if you're laughing, you're old enough to remember that. You might have dabbled in Drakkar Noir. That was like the hottest scent for, the guys. And, I had Eternity and Opium. And gosh, there was just so many childhood scents, right? And they bring back really remarkable memories. And, just the idea that they're sort of wrapped in chemicals that we now know have pretty bad health effects from an immune system. Phthalates essentially is the big group that keep scents lasting longer. They keep the scent. People want their scents not to last 10 minutes. They want them to last all day, right? That's how you get the ladies. That's how you get the guy. That's the point, right? Yeah. Is your pheromones, artificial pheromones. But the interesting thing is that that was a shocker because I felt like I had to give up something I truly enjoyed when I got up to go out into the world. Right. It turns out that the swaps that I made, and I did this, by the way, I don't know if you know, like teenage boys, at least my teenage boys are totally into cologne now.
Really?
They swap them, thank God it's not crack, and meth and whatever. But the hot thing to do in sort of the middle school and freshman and sophomore years is that you're really into scents. It's a thing. They smell it. They have samplers, and it's pretty wild. And when my kid comes, one of them, not the other one cares as much, but when he comes into the kitchen, the whole house smells, And do I ban them? I talk about getting rid of them. I really push them, but again, with teenagers,
I would lock them in the room.
Right. But then they don't listen to bigger things. So you have to fight your battles. Yeah. You have to pick your battles. And what I did with my teenage son is that we ordered non-toxic perfume and cologne, basically unisex, scents that are available now that are clean, and they had a sample pack. And we sat down and we actually did a little scent tasting thing. A scent smelling thing, because we also did chocolate.
Oh, nice.
So we had a little chocolate sampler that was really cool. And we did that with organic, chocolates. But the idea is I'm pulling him into the experiment.
Yeah.
And, and whatever we decided we liked, we got to buy. That was our treat. But it was this idea that you can smell good. Right. and not be toxic.
Right.
And he teaches his friends how to choose, even when he goes to summer camp, I said, you can only choose products that are a 2 or a 1 on EWG, or you can't buy it. I own the money,
Yeah.
And you know what? He figured out how to do that.
Wow.
So it's kind of an interesting thing when you're pulling in scents, like you said, what's the biggest shocker? It's giving up something, but it's also knowing that there's great things out there that are building over time, and that we now have clean beauty products and companies that are doing it right. We have cleaning products that are doing it better. We have reverse osmosis water filters, by the way, that have now come down in price dramatically. And I've followed the systems over the years because, fun fact, my dad is a kidney specialist. He's a nephrologist. He's 85.
No way.
He's an amazing guy.
So he's about filtering.
Oh, well, what's so interesting, well, he's not into any of this stuff, really.
Wow.
It's so interesting, but he's into a little bit of the chemicals now because of living with me around. But reverse osmosis historically was so interesting with dialysis. So dialysis, fake kidneys, or, kidneys that are synthetic so that people who don't have kidneys have functional way of living. I mean, this is a remarkable feat from medical technology, and it's really developed in the 70s and was commercially available. My dad helped bring it to New Jersey when he learned about, he was learning this in his residency. But RO water in huge tanks was and still is required for the function of dialysis machines all over the world. And what's so interesting is that they have this ability, reverse osmosis technology. The pore size is so small that it catches single-celled organisms, so viruses and bacteria and yeast and all these microbes, right? But they didn't plan on the thousands of chemicals that would come after the 1970s that are coming into our market every year. But those are bigger compounds, so they get caught in the RO membrane. And so it's so interesting talking to him because it used to be only commercially available, reverse osmosis technology. And I've watched over 15 years the pricing come down. So ours was $275, and we have one in my kitchen, one in my office. A plumber's $150 in New Jersey for 1 hour to split the water line. That's it.
Right.
So it's now become, and I write about this in the book, I have a whole water chapter, but any filtration's great. I want people to know that they haven't failed if they have a pitcher or a refrigerator door carbon block or whatever number of ways. But there's a variety of choices you now have, and they're not inaccessible to people who have financial issues.
Yeah, and the upside is you probably, if you do the economics of it, you're probably saving money too, and then you're changing out, instead of a plastic bottle or bringing in plastic,
or the drop-ins for these pitchers are so expensive.
Yeah, exactly. So that little investment goes a long way.
Totally.
And then the filters are, to your point, like they're barely anything compared to what they used to.
I even change it out myself and film it, which is funny because I forgot to turn the water system off, so that was pretty funny. Okay. You're supposed to turn that off before you change the filter. But you live and learn, right?
Yeah.
And it made for good, good for Instagram. But, it just shows you there's so many hacks to this problem in an interesting, fun way. If you want to gamify it, if you want to turn this into a process that's not daunting, I feel like I've had to figure it out, and I think it's something that pretty much it democratizes human health, in my opinion. Because everyone should be able to do all of this stuff, and not feel like it's only for the rich.
Yeah. And listen, we were born into this. This machine of overproducing and no regulation has been going on for so long, and so it's no one's fault. Right? But it's like, I was in this conversation where, flippantly people say, well, you got to eat this way, you got to do this because our ancestors. I'm like, okay. And we are in a modern world where even if you're eating meat, 99.9% of the people, the kind of meat you're eating is full of unwanted chemical exposures and the PFAS of that water and feeding with those grains. It's like, not picking on meat necessarily, but it's we have to look at this stuff.
Yeah.
We have to look at, don't flippantly say we're primal ancestors and all of that stuff, because all of a sudden half of 1% of those people are shooting their own animals, or they're growing all their own food,
Right.
but the majority of the people, and I think, I come from a small town, those are the people that are suffering the most.
Yeah.
They have no idea that this is going on. They can't believe that it would be this toxic of a world that has been created. That's the solution. Those are the people that we need to access, and to the point where, just like you said, let's walk through a solution and let's create an avenue where this isn't daunting. And there's some obviously more acute things when you're opening your mouth. You should maybe start there of the things that you're putting in your mouth and lower those exposures, and then try to find a fragrance that's not harming you.
Yeah, I mean, it's doable, and it's doable from the science, and it's doable from a mere mortal perspective of being on this planet. And I think we got big problems in regulation, but I spend a minute thinking about it. I keep moving. Yeah. I mean, I always keep
100%.
moving, because it's like, who cares? Like, it's great that they're taking but let's, whatever. It's like, let's just keep moving. I love the serenity prayer, and know what you can control and what you can, and have the wisdom to know the difference. That has been my motto for so much of this work, because the energy used to worry and fear and be, resistant is the same beautiful energy that you could put into making some real simple changes and keeping at it and doing the best you can. And to me, it's been very useful for patients, and I think it's just the right answer. So hopefully people will receive this work, or keep going with following your work, my work. We're talking a lot of the same stuff. It's remarkable.
Well, it's there should be be everywhere. It
should be in schools.
Yeah, 100%.
And I'm working to really. That's what I'm doing after this book, is focusing a lot on trying to get this into high school education, because it should be in there with smoking cessation and safe sex and home ec and whatever else tools we need for life. We should kind of teach these kids how to look up their makeup, or look up their cosmetics, or choose better tampons, or think about their body spray. How much of their water is not about hydration and how many cups of water. It's really about what's the quality of your water that feeds your body, that's made up of 85% water. So giving them real important, or even in high school, it's like this will affect your sperm count, and all of a sudden everyone's paying attention. Or you want to appeal to their concerns at that age group. It's remarkably effective. I've already done the work in testing this.
What do you think, from a kid's perspective, are going to? I mean, obviously the sexual side of things is their walking hormones. Certainly maybe performance in terms of athletic performance or whatever. But what do you think are the I mean, you have children too.
Yeah.
What's the access point? Because it's really hard in the silos of children. I know for me, I have this thing of kind of like this moment was like, we got to wake the moms, right? The moms are the gatekeepers also.
And they have great instincts to begin with, right? That's primal.
So just a little push and going, and they go, oh, why didn't...
You'd think waking the gynecologist would help, OB-GYNs, but that hasn't worked yet. No. Interestingly enough.
Bad system. Again, it's
a bad system.
It's a bad system.
Yeah.
It's a
training.
It's a fish bowl in the it's a fish in the fish bowl. It's what do you think that the easy access?
I'm learning as I had, my kids are teenagers, so this has been a really interesting area, because, and this demographic is so interesting because they use the most personal care products in a 24-hour period than any other demographic. Women on average use about 12 products. Men use about 6, and arguably should use more, some of them. And teenagers are at 17. And studies have shown this. And they also have some of the highest levels of some of these environmental chemicals. And so to give this, and it's important because when it comes to these chemicals, there are vulnerable periods of exposure. I mean, this has been shown that when there's a big flux of hormones being created, in one direction or another, including even menopause, by the way, is a very big area where chemicals play a role. But pregnancy, young kids, teenage years, pregnancy of those kids, and then menopause, these vulnerable periods have been shown to possibly be more sensitive to exposures because of that change of hormones. And my teenagers are like, moody one day, and then they can't wait to see me another day. And I'm like, I don't even know what's going to hit me. But, that's where intervening when they're a little bit more vulnerable, they're trying to look cute, they're trying to look, it's a really sweet spot for teenagers. They're self-aware. They're incredibly agile with apps and technology.
Right.
They're
inherently uncomfortable.
Yeah, and inherently uncomfortable is a great way to get in there, because you're going to lock in some really important tenets, and I'm hoping to do that. When I talk to these kids a couple days from now. So, and then they may or may not choose to have children one day. Right. So you're giving them all the right tools before they make these really big decisions in their lives, And I just think it's just the most perfect demographic to work with. So, what's the access point? I'm not really sure. It's just that they have enough qualities to make them the right demographic for this topic, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think if there's a way to kind of flip on the switch of common sense again, instead of the overwhelm of just what society is and the showering of what, like, it's the phone, it's the thing, like
it's the TikTok with the products that are completely unregulated. It's all of the stuff they're being, and we are too. Like, I can't tell you, I'm not, ooh, that makes you look younger. I'm like, ooh, we're all suckers for this kind of marketing campaign. And I will also mention that kids now also have family members that are sick. And so that may also be another access point, is that they themselves, maybe not themselves, who knows if they personally have an illness, but, we're seeing families where there's enough immune and autoimmune and cancers to make people concerned about what they're doing on a daily basis. And so that's another component of that demographic. They're just about to be adults, and they're willing to learn a lot more than we often are later in life.
Well, I say, like, way to go, because this is big. This was a tough. I know for me, it was a tough ride trying to dig.
And it's
through all this
lonely.
stuff. Yeah.
If I didn't have the support of the endocrine disrupting chemical community, Fred Vom Saal, who's a world-renowned, reproductive and neurobiologist, all of his colleagues around the world, I needed their support because they were doing this research and still are. Right. And I think when you find people who help push, the ball down the field, as they have done for 2 decades now, since the initial finding of BPA as an endocrine disruptor, it really inspires me to keep moving with what they're doing. So having a community like what you and you understand, and what you're teaching your community, me in my world with patients and medicine. I mean, it's everywhere you get a touch point. I think it's valuable.
Oh, it's huge.
And I appreciate it, because it makes my work and this topic much less lonely for me.
Yeah, think about that. All the giants of the researchers that have been literally in a silo, looking at this, staring at this, studying this stuff, and just going, "Oh my God!" And
they're not communicators by the definition of what they do, which has been so interesting. Even with Fred and I on previous books, is that we were reaching out to his colleagues, and he's a different type of researcher. He's all about spreading the word, but he's a researcher at his core. People who do bench research aren't anxious to get out there and communicate this. It's not their personality in many ways, too. But they don't make the recommendations. They do the science. It's people who, like yourself and I, can try to get our heads around it and do right by these people. I hold that very dear, that I say the research correctly. But those are the communicators. And when my podcast that I have, The Smart Human, I pull in the researchers, and I want to hear what they have to say if they're willing to come on, because that's the people who create the science, not the headlines. So to me, those are invaluable people, and communicating it properly is just as important as just communicating it. So I thank you for that.
Oh, Dr. Swan and Dr. Leo Trisande were huge to me. and then all of the thousands of research articles. You go, and that's the thing.
Yeah.
It's like, look at all these people doing all this work that no one has really
Right.
seen before.
And they go from Endocrine Society with their position statement to Reproductive, Society, ACOG, American College of Obstetrician and Gynecology. So they all have position statements, but it's still siloed in a world of academia.
Yeah.
And I think once you can pull it from there and get it into mainstream and I trust my patients. I trust the community to take information and put it to good use. And I think that that's the next layer of this, is to get it from siloed institutions as much as possible into the hands of people who can benefit most from it.
Yeah, well, you created something so that people can put it in their hands, and then I love the 21-day starting program.
Thanks.
Like, people can read a few and then jump to the program and just get to work as well.
Yeah.
So thank you, and I have a feeling that our work is not done together either.
I hope so.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Nice.